Welcome to The Keep, the Employee Experience Podcast. Your host, Greg Weiss, brings together experts from around the world sharing their insights on creating amazing employee experiences. Having the wrong attitude about their people can cost businesses a fortune. Having the right attitude will build success. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Angela. In this episode of The Keep podcast, I focus on mental health and safety. I spoke with Robert Migliore, an expert in this field, and the continuing stigma of mental health in the workplace, and how employers need to improve the employee experience in this area. Hi there, and welcome to the Keep podcast, and you're with Greg Weiss, and I'm here with Robert Migliore, Director of Actevate, who are workplace health safety people. Correct, Robert?
That's right, Greg.
And it's an interesting word, activate. It's not spelt the traditional way of activate. Tell me about the E in it to start off with.
When you're sort of putting a business concept together, you're often meeting with branding people and marketing people. And the thing that they got from meeting me was that I activate things. They really tried to get a sense of what I do. And they said, I think this guy actually makes things happen. He activates things. And of course, what we did was activate workplaces. So we bring workplaces to life by helping them with their mental health issues, their work injury issues, their safety issues. And he felt that had a lot to do with commerce and electronic commerce. And that's why he put the E where the I goes.
Nice little backstory there. So we're going to be talking about mental health today in the workplace. And the Keep podcast is about the employee experience. And sadly, we've got issues increasingly where there is mental health, and mental health impacts on work. So we're going to go through a fair bit today about obligations and the territory. But let's start off and talk about what is mental health. What is mental health in the workplace?
Well, mental health in the workplace is obviously topical right now. Everyone's talking about mental health issues, and we've got a lot of enormous investment in identifying people that have mental health issues in our community, and it's now seeping into the workplace.
Right. We're not talking about stigmatising people. We're talking about identifying. Let's look at the distinction there.
Right. Well, I think there's an enormous stigma that relates to mental health in the workplace.
Still.
So, absolutely. In our community, there's a sense of comfort now around coming forward with your mental health issues, and whether that's through the media, whether that's sporting personalities, politicians, many people now have the confidence to put their hand up and say, I'm someone who's suffering from depression, I'm suffering from anxiety, but that's not translating into the workplace.
And what's about that? Why is business strangely lagging society?
I think there are a lot of reasons for that, Greg, and I think business is not really ready to look at the whole issue around presenteeism and what that means. So there is a lot of research focusing on this term presenteeism, and let me quickly explain that to you.
Please.
Presenteeism is a measure of one's productivity. And we do know that people who are suffering from mental health issues are not going to be as present as a regular productive person. So we're looking at this presenteeism measure because we do know that people who suffer from mental health conditions are otherwise occupied when they might be at work as they would be at home by the mental health issue.
So it's different to absenteeism. Absenteeism is when you're not physically present. Presenteeism is you're present but not necessarily mentally present there. Is that correct?
Correct. That's right.
And it's an important term. It's a productivity term here. So let's circle back, because we said that society is ahead of business. So what's the issue there?
Well, I think the issue there is that a lot of people who have mental health issues are usually performance managed in the workplace. So there's the presenteeism issue comes to the fore. So it might be a manager or a supervisor or a colleague that identifies this person isn't as engaged. The lights are on but nobody's home. And that's often the feedback we have from managers about people that have mental health issues.
That's an interesting issue that you just raised there, Robert. When people are performance managed, is that the first time that a manager may find that there's a deeper issue with mental health?
Let me give you an example. So recently I had the head of industrial relations from a government department call me, and she said, "Rob, we've just got this really serious issue. Someone has just played the psycho card."
Right. What do you mean psycho?
Well, this gives you a sense of, if you like, the stigma that's associated with mental health in the workplace. So this particular person had been performance managed for a period of 18 months as a result of productivity issues, conduct issues, a whole range of issues. And he was on his final warning. And as a result of the last meeting he then presented with a certificate. And the certificate said that he had a mental health issue. The mental health issue was schizophrenia. And they didn't know what to do with that information.
So take us down a little bit further. What did they then do? What did you advise?
We advised them that they needed to understand that perhaps the conduct issues and the presenteeism or productivity issues had a lot to do with his mental health condition. So why don't we unpack that and work out exactly what's going on for this person? Because it definitely had an impact on his relationships in the workplace, his productivity in the workplace, and his perception of relationships as well. So we looked at getting to the bottom of what his problem was and how we could support him, or the business could support him, in actually regaining his health.
So we're going to unpack this a little bit further
Sure.
as well. But let me go back to the term psycho. And we were talking about stigma. Is that how people are approaching this area?
Well, when you've got the head of industrial relations for a major government department using that term, I think it says a lot about how far we need to go if organisations and workplaces are going to understand mental health and take a positive view.
Yeah, that's a very concerning thing, isn't it? So being correct here, we would have to broaden the term psycho
Yes.
to mean depression or mental health or some other aspect of it. Is that right? What would be more appropriate terminology that somebody who would call you up to say, we have an X happening here?
I think the most appropriate term is someone is having some challenges, and they may be classed as mental health challenges or productivity challenges, but certainly utilising a term challenge or disability is probably a lot more kosher than it is to say psycho.
Right. So kosher disability. Okay. I would imagine that a lot of employers who are listening to this are wondering, Greg, I hope you asked this question. And that question is, hey, I've got somebody going through performance management. Is it inevitable that somebody's going to be dealing the mental health card? How do we separate mental health issues genuinely from poor performance?
That's the $1 million question.
Maybe even more than $1 million.
Yes, well, apparently, according to the research that PwC did in 2014, they're talking about presenteeism being a $6 billion problem.
In Australia?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Annually.
Right. To larger economies, that would be just extraordinary. So how many people, supposedly, according to the PwC research, can you recall how many people are turning up with presenteeism issues?
They weren't really able to talk about that so much, but certainly what we classically know as someone being affected from mental health issues and perhaps raising a claim for bullying or harassment or anxiety or depression related to their work, that's a very, very small part of the problem, the productivity measure.
But I'll turn up to work. I'll admit this. I turn up to work and I'm not fully present all the time. I consider myself a reasonably high achiever. So take us through this, because it's quite a difficult territory for us to really understand the distinctions between mental health, productivity, performance, engagement, being on all the time. We're all human. How does the mental health part of things come into play, and how can we help managers separate it or silo that out from the other aspects?
So the conversation's moving on now from mental health to what we call psychosocial safety. And psychosocial safety climate is really the measure that industry needs to start considering.
That's an interesting term, psychosocial. Let's try and define that for the audience.
So the psychosocial elements that make up a person are the psychological, so their thoughts, and the social, the way they engage with people in the community. So we know that workplaces are a community and communities engage people. What the industry needs to take into account is that workplaces are very dynamic. They are places where people come to have a sense of well-being. So their well-being comes from their career. In fact, the latest research from Gallup indicates that career well-being is the number one thing that motivates people in their lifetime. So it may not have something to do entirely with their job, but actually how they gain meaning and purpose in their life. The workplace is a place where we gain perspective and meaning. Then if the workplace doesn't provide that in the form of not just who my boss is or how work tasks are delegated to me, but more globally, it's an environment that promotes my self-actualization. It gives me the opportunity to have input. It gives me a sense of purpose. It connects to how I'm hardwired, my personality and my emotional functioning. And that's really what industry is now asking of us as employers.
That's a huge obligation, a huge shift that's now on the shoulders of business to provide a much more safe and meaningful and engaging workplace. So when we come back from the break, what we're going to do is we're going to explore that a little bit further.
Eagle Ways Radio, the voice of small business.
People come and go in organisations all the time, and while that's normal, high employee turnover can be expensive. Greg Weiss and Career Support 365 have structured onboarding and offboarding services. They create the foundation for long-term success, protecting the employer and brand while helping people perform at their best and fit in quickly. Start strong, finish strong. To find out more, go to careersupport365.com.
Welcome back to the Keep podcast. I'm with Robert Migliore of Actevate, and we're talking about the psychosocial contract. Tell us more about that.
We talked earlier about how the conversation is moving from mental health, and mental health being, if you like, the onus of responsibility being with the individual. And that onus of responsibility is now shifting more towards the employer.
How?
Well, it's not really just about a duty of care, about providing a safe workplace with respect to making sure that the passageways are clear and that the stairwell's clear and that you have the right desk and the right computer. It's about the entire work environment and how your jobs are safe, and safe in a psychological sense, safe. And a psychosocial sense. So what is psychosocial safety? It's a relationship between the individual and the workplace, and that's made up by job design, how jobs are allocated, whether the worker has input into their daily working life. Do they get to make a decision about when and how they conduct their duties? What sort of relationship do they have with the workload, the supervisor, their manager, the vision of the company? So there's a lot more that comes into play now in terms of shaping one's experience in the workplace. And that's what you're talking about, Greg. You're about the
employee experience.
So psychosocial safety climate is the essence of the work experience or the human experience in the workplace.
Right. So in the past, what we'd have a reasonably mechanistic organisation. Somebody would come in, they'd be slotted in, and then you just do your job. Things have clearly moved on from there. But now what we're presented with is in the 21st century, in 2018, and what we're looking at is we're saying, okay, we've got more obligations in order for us to become an employer of choice, a better employer. There are people expecting more of an employer environment. Is that the case?
Well, there's only 50% of people say that their workplace is a psycho-socially safe place to be.
50%.
So only 50%
One
of
in
people.
two.
That's right. 1 in 2 people feel safe psychologically and psychosocially safe when they're at work. So we have a long way to go if we're going to start to make people feel like work is a great place to be.
Okay, so at the beginning of our podcast, we talked about the call that you got where somebody said, Rob, we've got a psycho here. That organisation would not be in that 50% of safe psychosocial environments. The benefits to employers of providing this are, let's go down that road, and what would be important as basics to move an organisation along that more advanced psychosocial road.
Organisations have been focusing a lot more on well-being, and so the well-being measures have been about giving people an opportunity to have rest breaks and giving them opportunities to perhaps have lunch provided. And so we've been looking externally at how we can improve the quality of life of people at work, so the whole experience that you talk about. But now we need to go a little deeper. We need to look at the relationship the person has with their work, and not just the relationship they have with their work colleagues or their work group, but the relationship they have with the actual work itself. And that's where there's a lot of well-being exploration at present.
Okay, example?
So the example is looking at job design, looking at whether there is an intrinsic value in how those performance measures have been put in place. Are they unachievable? I mean, is there too much of a stretch associated with the daily work task for that person? And does that then cause stress and anxiety for that person? Because that might be the very start of an anxiety disorder. This person has an unattainable, unachievable goal, and that's related to how their job is designed and the way their work community supports them in achieving those goals.
So here I am as an employer listening to this podcast and thinking about, I've got myself a project, I've got a department that I'm managing, I've got a business that I'm managing. I want people to fit into particular roles, and I'm recruiting for them to have certain skills that I need to train up or to bring people in that have got the right attitudes, and we can train up on those particular skills. I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here and say maybe the generations are just getting a little bit too soft. Maybe people are getting just a little bit too soft. Everybody's had tough jobs to complete. What is it about the environment here that's so different? Is it generational? Is it something else? I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Sure. It's very easy for us to blame millennials or Gen Ys. I mean, we're constantly blaming the new generation, and there really is a view from managers who might be baby boomers or Gen Xers thinking they just don't get it. They're not as productive. They're not as interested. But really, what it comes down to is engagement.
So what I'm hearing from you, Robert, is that we've got to be, as employers, looking at the design, and rather than having a job that's been defined and not considering about the load or the person, what we're asking a psychosocial contract is to go a little deeper and understand what's the impact of this job and the way we're designing it in the context of organisation. Is that right?
That's right. We're looking at insight and awareness. How can we equip our workforce to be aware of their own hard wiring?
Right.
So when they come into the workplace, they're aware of their strengths and their weaknesses.
The individual we're talking about.
That's right. How can we cultivate a sense of building on that person's strengths And that's what real engagement is about. And if you think about what this term psychosocial safety is all about, it's really about engagement. And the workforce has a responsibility of engaging that person because we know that highly engaged workforces are the most productive ones.
Correct. And that comes from a great employee experience.
That's right.
So great employee experience translates through better treatment of customers, all the productivity measures that employees have, and so on and so forth. Okay.
So if you break down, Greg, if you're about studying the employee experience, if you break down the best employee experience, you'll find that that's a very psychosocially safe climate that person's working in.
Right.
It's not just about the person being passionate about their job. There's a whole intrinsic value in that person coming to work that might even be unbeknownst to them, but their manager likes them, engages with them, gives them the opportunity to have input into their work design and the way tasks are allocated and the way they get to play in their workplace.
Right. So it's a much more collaborative environment. The more advanced organisations are much more collaborative rather than from the top down. I'm wondering, can you think of some examples worldwide, some examples where it's known that the engagement scores from within an organisation are that much higher, and they probably have high psychosocial scores?
That's a good question. And if you look at the research that Gallup are doing, and they work very closely with organisations, small organisations, and some of the biggest brand names in the world, what they're about is research. They're researching the engagement that people have with the workplace. And it comes down to a range of factors. And often it doesn't have anything to do with whether you have a drinks trolley on Friday afternoon. It's really about that engagement with your immediate supervisor, the person who you look up to. Do they understand what your aspirations are? What makes you tick? Who you are as a person? How are you hardwired? What drives you? What motivates you? And if there's that level of engagement in what is essentially the most intimate and most important relationship in the workplace, that's where you can start, by building that higher level of engagement.
I'm going to bring this down into probably more basic levels, and that is that I'm thinking, as you're talking about this, Robert, about the family. There are kids that come from happy, well-adjusted families who are happy, well-adjusted citizens, and they themselves go out and produce and so on and so forth. It's a safe environment at home. And those that come from, sadly, not such happy environments, by and large, have got some issues as well, where they haven't been made to feel safe at home. Drawing that analogy, it's a similar thing to work.
It is, and probably those family relationships where there is a sense of healthy regularity about that engagement, you'll find if you peel back the layers, you'll see there's a lot of acknowledgement, a lot of support, and a lack of judgment.
Right, and these are very different skills to what a command and control type manager would deploy some time ago. So anybody out there in listener land who's a command and controller, the impact of your style is more probably on the individual feeling less empowered, less engaged. Alternatively, having an environment, a culture where a manager has more collaboration creates a far higher level of engagement and better employee experience.
Yes. There's a real move towards knowing who people are at a deeper level.
Right.
And that may not suit everyone.
Right.
Because we're still considering that the best way of having relationships at work is an arm's length arrangement. I don't want to know what that person does on the weekend. I don't want to know what makes that person tick. I just need them to do these 5 things today.
And if there's something that I can reflect back on another podcast episode that we have, it was with Andrew O'Keefe. We were talking about the hardwired instincts of humans, and one of the things he talked about was grooming. And we learned in that particular podcast about the importance of really understanding the real individual, tempered with the need for productivity, because clearly people are being measured not just on productivity, but now also on team motivation, team collaboration, team measures and the like. This is a big complex area. We could have Robert back talking about other areas of mental health. I want to thank Robert very much for coming in. It's been a very engaging and deep conversation. I must say, I'm a bit of a babe in the woods when it comes to this. The term psychosocial is something that I would have thought was something out of a Hitchcock movie. So thanks very much for helping me out there. And in the meantime, I'm sure that if there are any show notes that you'd like to share with some resources from Activate, they're there in the show notes for you and the key points.
Thanks very much.
And thanks for coming in.
Thank you for listening to another podcast produced by Eagle Waves Radio. For more amazing podcasts, go to our website, eaglewavesradio.com.au. You can like us on Facebook and, of course, follow us on Twitter. Ever thought of having your own podcast? We can help.